Do a sound check. I want to do a sound check on the audio level.
And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud.
All right, we're about to begin. We want to thank you all for coming over from the fellowship dinner. Did you get enough to eat? Don't go to sleep this afternoon, though, okay? We've got some good material coming up. The real Mount Sinai, located in Saudi Arabia. We often thought it was the one that was there in the Sinai Peninsula, but I never could figure out how Moses got from Midian with his sheep over to that mountain and met the Lord in that burning bush. This one's much closer to Midian, and it makes more sense geographically and for the story as we go. We're going to find the mountain where God proclaimed his law and wrote it in stone. We need to have it written in our hearts now, don't we? So let's have a word of prayer before we invite Andrew to come and share with us again. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, we thank you for leaving your footprints in the sand and in the dirt there on Mount Ararat region. You have left testimony of yourself, especially for this time in history, before everything erupts, before that time of trouble, before Jesus comes. Now speak to our hearts and speak to us through your Spirit and through Andrew. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Andrew, come on up here and share with us about your excursions.
Thank you, Pastor. No problem. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully we're not suffering a food coma. You guys are awake. Well, we'll make it quick. We think we found Mount Sinai. That's it. We're going to go through all the evidence. We have 100 and something slides and some video clips of the drone footage we've flown over there. And so we'll just jump right into it. Now, how many were here last night, Friday night? I should ask who was not here last night. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little background. This will be a couple slides, not like I did last night. So I was in junior high, 7th, 8th grade, and I heard about this man named Ron Wyatt. He had come out to my church in the Sacramento, California area, and it was a school night, so my father went to the meetings. It was a one-night meeting, and he came back and said, this man believes he has found Mount Sinai and Noah's Ark and the Red Sea crossing. And so I was fascinated. I was always interested in archaeology and history as a kid. So I went out and bought his book, and then I went to the library and borrowed other books about the topic that he had mentioned. And I started communicating, writing letters to those who were involved with either his coworkers, friends and family, or critics, people who didn't agree with his position. And here's a letter that one of the scholars who had worked with Ron in the past had written, or had given me. This was from 1978, and way back in 1978, the letter mentions that Ron was looking at the Red Sea crossing being in the Gulf of Aqaba, and that Sinai was on the eastern side of the Gulf of Aqaba, the land of Arabia, the land of Midian. And so I always dreamed of going over to the sea, Mount Sinai. It was something that was intriguing and mysterious because you couldn't get into the country. And I would actually think about this so much that one night I had a dream where, and this is not a dream from God, this is just a dream where you're thinking about it too much and you ate pizza late or something. Because in this dream, I was being chased by Saudis. And so I had read the book by Larry Williams and how they snuck into the country and they were running through the desert, they claimed in the book. And so in my dream, I was at the base of Mount Sinai and these spotlights were shining down on me. It was like a prison break. And I was running across the desert sands and the spotlights were following me at night. And so it was more of a nightmare. But finally in 2014 or 13, a friend of mine introduced me to this individual. He's a European who does work witnessing to those in that part of the world. And he had a ministry, and he told me that he's trying to, he actually told me he's been to the mountain, and he would like to bring other people there. Now, I thought this would be impossible to get over there. I mean, I've tried for years to even get a job over there. I thought of different ways I could get into the country. Unlike Ron, like we talked about last night, I think, how he snuck into the country and then got arrested. I wasn't going to do that. But anyways, this man told me that he had a way, he had some contacts in the Saudi royal family, and he believed we could get visas. So Saudi Arabia is a closed Muslim country. You have to have a business visa or do a Muslim Hajj, your pilgrimage to Mecca, to get into the country, or you have family members there. There's no way just to go over there for a tourist, for tourism or anything like that. And so the process is quite intense to get a business visa. That was the only way we're going to get in, was the business visa. And because you have to have a Saudi company invite you. And then they invite the American company, and then there's all this paperwork you have to fill out. And so anyways, when he told me, this individual, that he could get the Saudi invite, which is the first step of getting a business visa, I was interested. So I told some friends, and we had a back and forth discussion whether we should do this. And finally, we had a group about, I think 9 of us total that went in 2016. And our business visa, the invite, actually came from a Saudi prince. And what was amazing about this, again, this was just kind of out of the blue, God working behind the scenes. So this individual, he had met a year before we went. He met an imam in North Africa. This guy was in charge, the pastor, but he was in charge of the North African area of other imams. And he wrote a letter of introduction to an imam in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. And so my friend was going to Saudi Arabia. He had a visa somehow, and he was going to go to the capital. And so this guy from North Africa said, here's a letter, go introduce yourself to this imam in Riyadh. So he gets to Riyadh, him and a buddy of his, and he goes to the mosque where this guy's supposed to be, and the assistants there tell him the guy's not here. The imam's not here at all. But he said, you might be interested in going down the street to this palace. He said, there's a Saudi prince you should meet down there. And so he goes down the street, walks into the door, and he was telling me this a month after it happened. And this was July of 2015. And he told me that he goes into the palace, and right in front of him, Saudi television is interviewing this prince. And they're talking about the Exodus of all things. And so this prince on Saudi television is saying that based on their belief that the body of the Pharaoh, when it is discovered from the Red Sea crossing, that's the sign of the end. Now, this is not in the Quran, so it must be some extra writings or something. But anyways, he's saying this on national television over there. And so obviously this individual, I almost said his name, this individual he does a lot of work in these countries, so he doesn't want his face or name mentioned. That's why he's blacked out. This individual, anyways, wanted to talk to this prince after the interview. And so the prince invited them to eat at his dinner table that night. And he was telling me that at the table he had all these high government officials, people from the EU, England, business people, Saudi government people. It was a banquet. He showed me photographs, and it just had food all over the place. They had real live leopards and lions you could pet, and it's a palace. And he ends up sitting at the table. This prince asked him and his friend, who are nobodies, they're not high up, they're not royalty. He asked them to sit with him and eat, and everyone else had their own section. And so here they are, by God's, by a divine appointment, he is meeting this prince who is interested in the Exodus. And this prince tells him, yes, I believe Mount Sinai is in my country. And so my friend, anyways, asked him if he could help us get visas to go into the country. Now, they give Americans 5-year multi-entry visas, so we can go, I'm halfway through my visa right now, but I can go multiple times, and it's a 6-month visa you can go on, so you can stay for 6 months. And so, anyways, this letter of invite, so not only did we get a business letter of invite, he wrote a personal letter that has our passports and names on it. And basically, this letter has gotten us out of a lot of trouble over there for different reasons. But again, this is a God thing where it was arranged. And so we explored the country a lot in that very first trip. We were in Northwest Arabia for about 10 days on that first trip in April 2016. You can see we drove all over the land of Midian there. And then since that time, I've been back 13, 14 times into the country. And this last year, I was there 6 or 7 times. And I've driven over 15,000 miles on the ground, just exploring Midian, documenting the evidence for the Exodus, and researching, the different possible routes they would have taken through the Exodus, during the Exodus. And so these blue lines you see on the screen, these are my GPS. I have a GPS app that just keeps running the whole time I'm walking or driving, so it keeps track of where I've been. And so these are all the trips combined into one map. And this is the mountain we're going to be talking about today. This is my GPS tracks overlaid on Google Maps. So this is a 3D Google map, and I overlaid everywhere I've been. This is in front of the mountain that we believe is Mount Sinai, where the red arrow points out. So as we talked about last night, we've been doing a lot of drone videoing and exploring. So a lot of times, now drones are illegal there. Or at least they were until this year, actually. You can now register drones in the country, we found out. But the last a couple of years when we've been there, we've had to sneak in the equipment. And so, again, this is where God has opened the doors for us to get equipment in without it. We're not smugglers, but basically, like this first drone here you see, this is from our September 2016 trip. It's the size, it sounds like a lawnmower. It's the size of a big suitcase. It comes in, it has its own suitcase. And so we're crossing the border into Saudi Arabia with this. And because of that letter from the prince, they decided not to search our luggage. And so If they did, they would have found that and probably confiscated it. They might have returned it, we're not sure, but anyways, we got it in, and we were able to film on that first trip with that big drone. After that, we brought in the smaller ones. They're all 4K cameras, but the other one fits in your pocket, and a lot better. It doesn't sound as loud, it's not as noisy. I'm trying to remember what I had on these, because just right before the presentation, I rearranged my slides. So now I know what I have there. Okay, so one of the miracles besides bringing in the drones, on that very first trip, when we get to the base of, it's called Jebel Makla, and it's in the Jebel El Laz range. So if you were to Google this, you look in Jebel El Laz, you can see the discussion about Mount Sinai. But at the base of this mountain, there's now a Bedouin little town. In the past, when Ron and others were there in the 80s, it was remote. But now there's a gas station there, there's a little mosque, and there's a whole bunch of little homes. And so the Bedouins are told to keep people out. So if you go to this area and you get caught, they will either turn you into the police, who will question you. My friend who gave us the visas, or got us the visas, he got caught there. He made he accidentally took a photograph of a police officer, and he shouldn't have, and that guy turned on him, got really upset, wanted to know why he was taking photographs. And so he was brought to the police station, was questioned for 5 hours in Arabic, what he was doing out there in the desert with a camera and all that. When we were there, a miracle happened where everyone basically was gone. The day we were going to climb the mountain and go to the summit, or go to the cave of Elijah, that day no one was around. And so that was one of the first of many miracles on that first trip. And we were able to document the sites at the base of the mountain. And then within a week later, we actually climbed the mountain finally and get to the summit, and you'll see video clips of that. But the day before we climbed, we're going back to the base of the mountain. We're investigating the sites there. And I have a little video I made that whole day. I'm always on my iPhone taking video. And so as this is happening, I don't know it's a miracle. At first, basically, a friend of mine doesn't show up. We kind of split up and explore on our own. Me and my videographer friend, and then this other gentleman, he takes off and doesn't come back on the set time. And so there was some confusion there, what we were supposed to do. And so as we're going through the day, this is happening, and I take video of it, and you'll see how God worked out a miracle that we're still benefiting from today. And so this is, I think, it's a little longer video, because I put a whole bunch of clips together, but you can just sit back and enjoy this. Okay, here we are. You can see the mountain behind us, way over there, and we are walking back to the village in front of Mount Sinai. And what's really cool was today, we were sneaking around, as you'll see from my other videos. We got in here again. We're hiding behind bushes. So here we go. So we're in the fenced-in area where you're not supposed to be, at the base of the mountain. The whole mountain is fenced off. So here we are. We're about to set up some video shots. Just praying nobody bothers us. As you can see, we're looking up at Mount Sinai, and you can see the cave of Elijah on the one peak, and the lone tree between the two boulders, and then the darkened peak beyond that. So we're just getting some video shots today. Hopefully it all turns out, Lord willing, inshallah. And we get back to the car by 11:30, and the other guy who's with us, Scott, he didn't make it back, and he's usually good on that. And so we're like, okay, what do we do? So we went ahead and ate lunch, and he still didn't show up. So then we decided to wait a little bit longer, and still no Scott. Then we go back to the village and we drive around, and no Scott. So we thought maybe he got arrested. Well, we decided to go back to where we parked before, which is over here, over there somewhere. And we waited. Then we said, let's just go down and look. So Nathan and looking up from a rock outcrop for Scott, and they couldn't see him anywhere. So I decided to go down into the gully and just walk the fence. And as I was walking the fence, I hear this bah. No, actually, that's a goat. I mean, that's a sheep. I heard 2 goat sounds, and I thought Scott was injured or something. And so I just listened again. I kept on walking. I heard the same sound. I was like, there's no sheep here. And I turned the corner, and there's these 2 baby goats. This all abandoned under the tree, under a bush. And it looked like they were just born the day or 2 before. So I found these 2 abandoned baby goats just under a bush. So anyways, I called for Nathan Udo, and we take them back to the car, and about that time, Scott shows up, and we did not know what to do with the goats. So, well, let's just go to the village and drop them off.
Huh? Alone, and the sun burns.
We're trying to hand the goats off to this kid, the Saudi kid. He wouldn't take them from us.
All the time.
And when we go back to the gas station, we meet these people, and they became really friendly and gave us tea and coffee, and Arabic coffee, and yeah, we just became good friends over because of these goats that we found. We were feeding them with little baby bottles with cow's milk.
Oh,
Like Saudi.
very hungry.
Very hungry babies. And then after that, they're like, oh, there's Mountain of Musa. And so they decide to show us up here.
Hello.
Hello, America!
Hello, Saudi Arabian.
So these Saudi guys decided to show us the Mountain of Moses, they call it, Mount Sinai. They didn't know we were just up there sneaking around earlier. And they show us everything, though we were sneaking around. Went up to the altar.
What do they say? They say the animals used to come here, they were brought here, and they were sacrificed here, and then people went this way.
جيب 4 يجي
The other side.
1 ذبح 3 ارجع
He's saying they killed them. They come up that little lane and they kill the animal right there.
هذا لبن.
They even told us that they sacrificed the animals down here. Part of their tradition too. Let's see the building. Pretty big structure. It looks like an altar where they would let the animals down for sacrifice. The marble columns, and then we're just walking across the whole plain. And yeah, it's been a great trip. So that was one of the miracles on our very first trip. And the reason why we've been going over there besides this research is to film it because it's so difficult to get over there. So a lot of people have not been there. And so here's just a behind the scenes look at some of our filming being done. It's I think a 2-minute clip. You might have seen one of these clips yesterday. It has the camel in it. Well, we found a case. This is the Rhino slider I rented. We lost some of our luggage driving around the desert. Thankfully, we found it again.
I'm glad it's in a Pelican case.
It's in one piece.
It's the one piece.
It's in one piece.
Hey, Mr. Camel. I'm trying to be the camel whisperer. He's intrigued. Is it good? This guy, he's from Libya, and he feeds his goats by knocking down the stuff from the trees. There's nothing around to eat. That gives you a little taste of what it's like to be on one of our trips. Especially in Saudi Arabia, we meet a lot of camels, and people who go with us the first time, they end up wanting us to stop everywhere for camels. And after that first trip, we basically made a rule that we're not going to stop for a camel. But we never obey it. We always see a perfect picturesque scene where the camel is a lone tree or sunset, and we have to take a photograph. They're all domesticated there, so they're not wild, these animals. But they can, some of them are more friendly than others. But so, again, last night we talked about the land of Midian. I'm just going to briefly go over this part again for those who didn't make it last night. And because the two things go together, the Red Sea crossing has to lead to wherever you put Mount Sinai, and vice versa. And so we started with the Red Sea last night, but we're going to talk about Midian again because we believe that Midian is where Mount Sinai is. Now, other people have put Mount Sinai in another part of the Middle East, and we believe biblically you can't do that, and it just doesn't make sense also how Moses, he led the flocks of Jethro, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So in Exodus 2:15, we read how Moses fled to the land of Midian. He was fleeing Pharaoh, and so here's a map. Again, all maps you find, Midian is placed in northwest Saudi Arabia. This is where the archaeological evidence is. And even modern maps, this one in the last image was a modern driving map you can buy in Saudi Arabia, and it shows Midian, and they label it there. You open your Bible, look at the maps in the back of your Bible, almost all of them have Midian back there. And this is from an archaeological article about Midianite pottery, and it just shows how it spread out from northwest Arabia all the way up into the land of Israel. And so Moses, fleeing Pharaoh, would have taken the trade route. This is the path, the stony path, whatever. They didn't have freeways back then, so this is the main road that you'd go between Egypt on the left and Midian down in the middle there. And so this trade route, which is marked like on this archaeological map, would have been his route down to see Jethro, where he met Jethro and his daughters. Some of this was covered last night, but this is the NASA photograph that's kind of highlighting this mountainous area of northwest Saudi Arabia. Another country, again, it's pretty dry. And we talked about how it could have been a little, had more water back in the time of Moses, 3,500 years ago. But during the Exodus, the Bible talks about them always complaining about water. So we know it was not a lush tropical forest there. But there are oases around, and these watering holes are where Moses took the Israelites. So when you read the book of Exodus, you'll find that he's taken them to basically different watering holes. And then the places where they have no water, God performs the miracle. And we're going to look at one of those sites today where Moses struck the rock. So again, you're looking at these oases. Now, one oasis is a pretty big one. It's called El-Bad, and there's a strong tradition of Jethro even living there. And people today grow mango trees, there's citrus trees growing, and alfalfa. And the water table is pretty high there, so the guy was telling us he could drill down, I think it was 10 to 20 feet, and hit the water. Now, in front of Mount Sinai, it's a high desert plain, so it's a cooler environment, a little not as dry on the west side we were just at, but this side does have these bushes that grow all over the plain, and the camels and goats eat them. So there is vegetation there. Again, this is not Moab or southwest U.S. This is Saudi Arabia here. And so here, again, there are sections that are super dry, just a desert. And here's an example, a big red sand dune, and this red rock area we call it. Now, the land is scattered with archaeological sites. Now, this is a Midianite site here in El-Bad, the town that we believe Jethro lived in. And they have it all fenced off. You're not allowed to go in there. It just has a big sign in English and Arabic telling you to keep out. So we know Jethro and the Midianites lived in northwest Saudi Arabia. We know that Moses fled there, but was Mount Sinai also nearby? Or was it in the Sinai Peninsula in the land of Egypt? Now, if you read Exodus 3, 1-2, it mentions the burning bush incident. Remember, Moses was taking Jethro's flock out into the wilderness, and he sees this bush that doesn't burn. And that's when, God appoints him to go back to Egypt and take the Israelites and free, the slaves. So in this verse, though, the key thing about it was that it says he led the flocks to the west side, or in other versions, the backside of the wilderness. It's the same Hebrew word, west side, backside. So then it says he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. It most likely refers to the region too. So this region where the mountain of God was on the backside of a desert. And we'll look at some other maps later on, and you'll see that this mountain range we're looking at, that the locals tell you is the mountain of Moses, is on the west side of this big desert. And so here is another quote from Ellen White, the biblical writer. She talks about how Moses, while keeping the flocks of Jethro in the land of Midian, that's when the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the burning bush. And so here's another author who recognizes that the burning bush incident, which was at the base of Mount Sinai, or at Mount Sinai, happened in the land of Midian. So if we look at the land of Midian, here's again this satellite image, and if we were to pinpoint the traditional Mount Sinai sites, there's 3 or 4 mountains in this area of the Sinai Peninsula that if you're a tourist, you can go over to Egypt and you can go visit this site. There's a monastery at the base of the site. There's hotels there. So you can go there. But the land of Midian is way over on the other side. And so here the traditional scholars who believe that Sinai is over there, they have to take that verse about Moses taking the flocks of Jethro and take this long journey all the way, following the bouncing arrows, all the way to the traditional Mount Sinai. It doesn't make any sense. And in fact, what we know today from the Bedouins there is that this journey, they even do today, of taking the sheep from lower elevations to higher elevations based on the season. They're not taking it all the way around the Gulf of Aqaba down to a mountainous region. It doesn't make any sense. There's no reason to take sheep down over there in this dry, arid, mountainous region, the Sinai Peninsula. So that route there is what you have to accept if you're going to put Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. And there's no logic for that. The most likely thing that happened was that Moses was near El-Bada, that town that has all that water, and when he's taking the sheep into the mountains at a certain time of the year, he is doing what every other Bedouin even today does, and he's moving the sheep from one elevation to another elevation based on the seasons. Now what we're going to look at, yesterday, remember we went right to the Red Sea crossing, we made it across with the Israelites, and we saw some drone footage on the Saudi side. Well, we're going to continue that journey via these dry riverbeds, the wadis, all the way to this mountain. And on the way, we'll show what evidences we have found that point to this as being the route of the Exodus and Jebel Allah as being Mount Sinai. And so we're going to start at the Red Sea crossing. And if you remember, it's the Nuweiba beach on the Gulf of Aqaba, midway there where that arrow's at. And we're just zooming into this Israeli bathymetric chart that kind of shows you what it's like underwater. We're zooming into the same chart. You see that is shallower at this point across, and it has a nice smooth path and a gentle slope. And now we're on the Saudi side looking back at the Sinai Peninsula. So again, this is about 8 to 9 miles across right here. Now from the beach, we're going to head inland. They can't just get stuck on the beach. They got to have a way off the beach. And so on the Saudi side, there are about 3 or 4 wadis that we have explored. And there's 1 or 2 main ones that are gentle enough and wide enough for the Israelites to have traveled. And we know from the biblical account that after they left the Red Sea, here in chapter 15, it says they went 3 days into the wilderness of Shur. And Shur being most likely a mountainous region and a wall of mountains that kind of blocks you in. Well, these wadis, these dry riverbeds, they lead you through that and into this wilderness where there's no water. And what's really interesting, so here's the map of that area. And so we've explored, you see all those blue lines, we've explored all those areas, just driving, walking. And then the mountain we're looking at is in the bottom of the screen that kind of looked like a volcano I put. That's Jebel Allah, Jebel Makla. And so the region we're focused in on is up here by the Red Sea crossing, a 3 days journey into the wilderness. And then we're trying to figure out which way did they go. Now, There is some discussion, and some people have suggested that they went south from the Red Sea along the coast. The biggest problem with that are that the mountains there go right to the sea. It blocks them. There's no way to go there. There is now there's a modern road that cuts through the mountains, and so it gives you an idea. A friend of mine did this drive back in October. Now, there's a police gate there, so we haven't been there because he snuck around the police gate and was driving down this road that he's not supposed to go until he got caught. And then they were really upset at him. They told him to go back. He had to turn around and go back. But this road here, and here's a drone footage of it, you can see that the coast is really mountainous when you go south from the Red Sea crossing. So there's no way 1 to 2 million people with their carts and animals could have gone this way, especially now that we've seen that the modern road was cut right into the side of the mountain. And so you're just looking at, there's no sound with this video, it's just some drone footage we shot. Looking back, the Red Sea would be north of here, around the corner. And so the route we're looking at, there are different colors on this map. And so the yellow, green, and blue are different ways you can get off the Red Sea crossing beach. These are wide enough canyons that you can walk up. They're not steep. And so we've driven these. And so these, again, would let them go at least a day's journey through the coastal mountains and then onto the eastern side of the coastal mountains. And so that is the arrow of the Red Sea crossing. And so south of there, we saw the little palm trees pop up. We're going to talk about that site in a bit. But between the Red Sea crossing and those palm trees, they had to get down there to that watering hole, is this area that even maps from 100 years ago still mention the name Mara. Now, it's spelled a little differently. This map here from 1910 or 1907, it has it as M-R-A-H. This was a Czech explorer who went down through this area and he was mapping out things in the early 1900s. Just pointing out the name. And then even modern-day geology maps from Saudi Arabia that we've downloaded off the internet, they have wadis and mountains named Mara in that area. And I'm just highlighting this box that has these different geological features that the ancient name of Mara has continued, we believe, unto today, where you see these names are applied to different features in the area, whether it's a mountain or a valley, they call it Mara. Now here's a drone footage. I shot, what I did, I went to the top of this mountain that had a cell phone tower, so there was a road I could drive up. And then from there, I flew the drone as high as it could go, so about 1,500 feet from the top of the mountain. Because they put limits on how high you can fly these drones. It's built into the drone. So we're just kind of showing you that if you go on the other side of those mountains there in the distance, that's the Red Sea crossing. So on this side, there's valleys and canyons and plains. Like here's one of the big open areas. But it's all dry. There's no water here. Now at Mara, as the biblical account says, they did find water. It was bitter water, stale, stagnant water. And so they complained, and God performs his first miracle with water, for drinking water for them on the Exodus. It was here at Mara. And then within a day, they end up at Elim, and a couple days later, they're down by this place that was an oasis. And the Bible says that it had 12 springs of wells of water and 70 palm trees. And this site is actually well known today in Saudi Arabia. When we were at the so-called tombs of Jethro, this tomb site that's a public archaeological site, one of the Saudi guys came up to us and told us about this oasis. Now, we had already been there, and I'll mark it. So there's the Red Sea crossing, the red arrow, and then that bouncing palm tree at the bottom is this oasis we're now going to. And in between that would have been Mara. And so as you're driving down from the location of this region of Mara, you hit this oasis, and the Saudi guy said, you need to go here. It's really beautiful. This is where Musa and the Yehudites, the Jews, the Israelites, came through. And so it's just interesting, they still have this same tradition today of the Israelites and Moses coming through this area. And when you go there, obviously there's a lot more than 70 palm trees. They've had a lot of baby palms over the last 3,500 years, but there's still 12 wells. Now, I don't know if these are the exact 12 wells, or just by chance we find 12 wells, but we went around and counted, and others have done it too, and there are 12 wells spread out through these, there's like 3 or 4 palm groves. Now, we were there in June of this last year, and it was date season, and they had ripe dates on the trees, and we met 2 Saudi men out there harvesting these wild dates, and so they let us have some. They would knock them down. I don't know if I have a photograph, but anyways, here's one of the wells. But they would knock the dates off the tree, and because you have to have a long pole, and then they'd fall on the ground, and you pick them up to eat, covered in dust. Now, the question some people have asked, well, is this canyon big enough for the 1 to 2 million people? And if you calculate them spread out through all the connecting canyons within like a 5-mile radius or a little more, there's definitely enough. So if you were to look at this site, and again, that's the palm tree site, and then there's the Mountain of Moses on the other side of the screen. Around Mount Sinai, in that green area, that big plain that you're going to see at the end of the presentation where they encamped in front of Mount Sinai, that green area is 17,000 acres. So this is Google Earth calculating it. Now, if you look at this site around Elam, the 70 palm tree site, it's about 7,000 acres. And if you look at the Nueva Crossing site, it's about 5,000 to 6,000 acres. So we know they fit at Nueva. So these other sites, they definitely had enough room to camp. Here's a little video of the drone footage showing you what it's like at Elam. See one of the wells at the top of the screen there. We almost hit a palm tree on this. If you go about 3.5 miles down that canyon, you kind of see it to the right, you hit the Red Sea. So it does it dead ends at the Red Sea. There's no way out of this area from that location. You have to backtrack a little, and we'll show you in a bit. Now, one thing that was in filming this, our very first trip, we brought a drone to this site, was 2017. We had a little drone this time, and my friend was doing the video work. It was his first time flying this drone, and it was our very first shot, and we still had 2 weeks to go of filming. And I was telling him a story of how I had a bigger drone in Sacramento, California, and I was flying at my house, and this owl, or some big bird came down and attacked it. And I had to land the thing really fast. And so I was telling him the story, and as I'm telling the story, he's telling me, that's not going to happen. Why would a bird do that? And I look up, so he's looking at his screen, and I'm looking at him, and I look up, and about 100 feet away, a huge bird of prey is actually above our drone with his talons out and the wings spread, and is about to take out the drone. So we all panic. I scream at him, land the drone, land the drone. And he gets all frustrated and actually goes up instead of down on the controller. And the crazy thing is the drone hit the bird in the head and knocked it out. And we watched this bird just fall upside down and hit the ground from 100 feet in the air. The drone was fine. And so I immediately took out my iPhone camera. My iPhone started recording as I'm walking up to the bird. And then that's when it kind of gets up. It was still alive. It was all dazed. And it stood there for a little bit, and then it flew off and then landed on a pole and just kind of got its sense there, like, what type of bird was that? I'm sure he told all his bird friends that not to mess with something like that. The Americans have special type of birds. And so anyways, that's this little story from that site. It's actually one of my favorite sites there. It's really peaceful. That and the Split Rock I really enjoy going to. It's a remote canyon, and you have all these palm trees there. Now, the Bible account in Exodus doesn't talk about this next camping site of the Exodus, but in Numbers chapter 33, Moses, there he's listing every single camping site from the land of Goshen to Mount Sinai to the Promised Land, and then the 40 years of wandering. So in that chapter, in verse 10, he says that after they went to Elim, they encamped by the Red Sea. So this is a really key verse because what it shows is their direction of travel. They didn't go inland. They actually went either north or south. Now, they came from the north. That's the only spot the Red Sea crossing fits. So this verse that tells us that they went south. Now, is there a way you can go south from this oasis? Yes, there is. And so here you're seeing that red line. It's about a day's journey, 20 miles or so, from the oasis all the way down to another oasis called Magna today. And here is another strong tradition. The locals will tell you that Moses was here. And Google Maps will say Wells of Moses. And so this big oasis, there's a lot of water bubbling out of the ground. It has a big flat area around the springs where the Israelites could encamp. And again, so that's the oasis, the little bouncy palm tree there. And here's the drone footage just showing that path that we had marked in red on the map, that it's definitely walkable. And in the distance, actually, you can see in this hazy photograph the Red Sea. We're looking south, just kind of panning around. And so from that area, they go down to this site. Here's where it says Wells of Moses on Google Maps. So it's a really beautiful spring area. In fact, when I sent some of these photographs to a friend, especially this one, they thought I was in Hawaii. You know, there's palm trees growing, you have beautiful sunsets, and it's just, you know, if you go like 100 feet out of this area, then it's desert. But right here, it's really nice. Now, the biblical account after this, it mentioned a couple other stops in Numbers 33, but in Exodus, it says after Elim, they camp in the wilderness of Sin, and then they ended up where one of the biggest miracles of during the trip occurred, where Moses struck the rock and water came out. Now, this is a very special site, and not only do the locals tell you that this happened there, but you can visually see it, this huge 70-foot rock. In Exodus chapter 17, it says, all the congregation of the people of Israel camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So now we know it's a dry area. There's no oasis this time at Rephidim. And then in chapter 18, it also mentions that this site was at Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And so we'll get into that a little later, but basically this is telling us it's on one side of the mountain because the Israelites, after this event, chapter 19 says they journeyed again to camp at Mount Sinai. So if chapter 18 says that they're at the mountain of God where the split rock is, that means they're opposite sides of the mountain range for both events. So the split rock is on one side, the encampment where they spend 11 months is on the other side. And now we know that because physically when you go there, you can see this in person. So now those verses make sense. And again, so we're looking at, these are just maps from Google Earth. I'll go back to this map. So you see the red kind of going down to the Red Sea crossing, going south from the Red Sea crossing, and the red going all the way to where this split rock we're going to look at. It's just a dry region. There's no water there. Now, it is a forbidden area, but there's no signs or fences telling you to keep out, but the locals will tell you it's a military zone. At the top of the mountain range is a big radar station that monitors all the way to Iran, to Israel, and it's a big mushroom-shaped thing at the top. And so they'll kick you out if you go there. And so we've gotten caught a couple times there, and other times we've fled. They chased us in their cars, and we're driving really fast in our trucks. You can see how dry it is there. Now in verse 6 of chapter 17, God says, behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. Now this is the rock we're looking at, and I'm going to show you some drone footage in a second, but here's some still photographs, and if you can't notice the people standing there, I'm going to put a little star beside their heads. You see how it's about 60 or 70 feet tall, and it's on a big hill. Now here's looking through. You can walk through the split. It's a giant split boulder. Now in Psalm 78, it gives a little more details, and it says that the water came down and flowed like rivers. If you think there's 1 to 2 million people with their cattle, it wasn't a little trickle. Now, if you look at drawings and paintings by artists, they show Moses, collecting water. Everyone's getting a little cup and they're walking by, get their cup full of water and keep walking. Psalm 78 talks about rivers of water coming out of this rock. Now we're going to look at some drone footage, It's, I think, a 2-minute clip. One day we had a whole group of camels go by on the way to their camp. It was a perfect shot. Anyways, that's one of my favorite sites in the land of Midian. So after the Red Sea crossing, when they get to Elim, the oasis, and then they go to Rephidim, where they get the split rock happen, they end up finally on the eastern side of the mountain range where they encamp. And now this is where the golden calf altar incident occurs. In Exodus 32, it talks about how Aaron helped them create this golden calf. And if you look at this mountain range we're looking at, the yellow points out the mountain we have climbed that the locals will tell you is Mount Sinai. The red, right across the valley in front of the mountain, is this cow petroglyph site where all these boulders are stacked up and they're covered in cow petroglyphs, cow carvings. Now it's funny, one of the locals calls it the golden baby camel site. And then another would say the baby cow site instead of calf. So anyways, they know the story themselves about Aaron and the golden calf. So the site is fenced off. You can see, again, here's the mountain that we're looking at that we'll be climbing soon. And in front of it is this fenced off archaeological site that are covered in cow petroglyphs. Now when Ron was there in 1985, they discovered this site. And when this was shown to the Saudi archaeologists later on the trip that year, they congratulated him on finding Mount Sinai, and they told him that these were unique Egyptian-style bulls and cows. Now, we're just going to go through a bunch of images. There's a lot of them on these boulders. This is one of the famous photographs you'll probably see on the internet. Now, our contact, so remember I told you the whole baby goat story. What I forgot to mention is one of the guys who we met because of those 2 baby goats, this is why it was a miracle. Not just did they show us everything around the mountain inside the fence, they even took us inside the fence for this site here, but he became a close friend. So every time we go over there, he's let us fly the drone on his property. He's shown us around, and so he's become a good contact for our research over there. Again, just more bulls or cows with horns. In this photo, you can see my photographers, so you can see kind of how big they are for some of the cow petroglyphs. Now, in the book of Exodus, chapter 32, it talks about this big party they're having in front of God at the base of Mount Sinai. So notice what they're doing. They're eating, drinking, playing, singing, and dancing. Now, there are 2 cow deities in ancient Egypt in their religion. One was a female cow goddess called Hathor, and she was the patron of dancers. Remember we talked about that? Percussive music, sexuality, artisans, musicians, and dancers. So everyone involved with creating this golden cow, she would be the god they're worshiping. And you'll notice it's talking about the horns that she has at the very last point there. Now this is a photograph of the cow goddess Hathor, and this was found in King Tut's tomb. This idol is now in a museum in Luxor in southern Egypt. Now, the cow god Hathor, notice in this one, it's just the horns. And remember some of the petroglyphs we saw, how the horns are, the style? Well, not only do they have just the horns, but sometimes they carve her with the sun disk of Ra between the horns. You see the circular disc on top of the head there of the cow. And then on that one, there's actually the cobra in the middle. Now, here's another example of Hathor. And this one, there's no cobra, just the sun disk Ra. And then this one, which is at a tomb site, you see Hathor. And at the bottom, I don't know if you can make out, there's actually a person drinking her milk, because one of the beliefs is that she gives nourishment to Egypt. And so this is what the Israelites are worshiping in front of the real God on top of the mountain. They were not even hiding it. Now the other cow god in the religion was the bull Apis, and he was basically the chief god in some of the areas there. And the interesting thing about him is that he was supposedly the god of creation, the arts, fertility, and craftsmen. So again, this thing of creating the bull god, and they're basically saying this creator, this god of creation, was the one who took them out of Egypt and saved them. And so that had to have been quite an insult to the real God who was talking to Moses at this time, right? And so here are some statues from museums of the Apis, the male god. We have a short little drone video to kind of showing you the site. I'll give you an idea what it's like. Now, what's interesting is that after the Golden Calf incident, 3,000 people were killed, and that's not the interesting part, but the part that you're looking at here is that about 5 miles north of that site is a massive graveyard that they have fenced off as an archaeological site. And there's standing stones and piles of stones marking graves scattered throughout that whole area. And this is on the edge of the encampment. They most likely wouldn't bury the dead right in the middle where they were camping. I'm going to jump ahead. There's some sections of slides just showing you the mountain itself, but we have drone video that will do that. So I'm going to skip some of that and just go right to this one section here about the plain. This is, again, where we just talked about how they encamped in front of the mountain. There's this 17,000 acre plain. Exodus 19, chapter 2, verse 2 says that. And so here we're at actually the summit or the cave of Elijah, I'm not sure. But we're near the top, and we're looking down across the valley. You can see the wide open space here. And actually, you can see our SUV at the bottom of the photo there. And now we're looking back at the mountain, close-up of the mountain, and there's different views of the big plain that surrounds on the eastern side of Mount Sinai. And here's a quote from Patriarchs and Prophets that kind of gives a sense of direction. She mentions that when they finished camping there for 11 months, that they went east, and east was a bunch of, she calls it mountain masses, huddled together, black and desolate. Now, what's really cool about the site is on the eastern edge of that whole plain are blackened mountains, and there's only one way through there. And so here's a little drone shot going through these black mountains, and it fits perfectly what she was writing there. And so again, we're looking at this eastern side, so the blue arrows are pointing out these black mountains that surround the plain. Now, why did she write that? Now, what would be the purpose of going east when they're done camping at Mount Sinai? Well, if you look at the green arrow, and I'm not sure what that red box is for, but that green arrow basically points out there's an ancient trade route up and down this red rock area that goes to the Promised Land. And so when they leave Mount Sinai, they hit basically you can call this the freeway. They hit the interstate system to head up to the Promised Land, and it was just right across from where they were camped in front of the mountain. And here's from a Saudi archaeological article about this area. And along this ancient trade route are lots of petroglyphs and carvings on the rocks. And so in the middle of that is this trade route going up north to Israel. And so here's just a map showing that. Now, this trade route, it's pretty, it's intense driving out there in that sand, but it's really beautiful, and we've gotten a lot of good shots just showing you what Saudi Arabia is like. And this was one of my favorite shots we did in April this last year. And this is the guy who tried to give us camel milk, but a nice guy. And so he set up this shot for us and told us to stay overnight at his camp, and he would tell his camel guy to take the camels out. And so we filmed it that morning. Now, this is why I skipped a whole bunch of slides, because we're going to watch basically a summary of the drone footage from the mountain itself and around what's at the base of the Mount Sinai and the cave of Elijah. So this is all in a 2-minute or so clip. This is, again, the massive plain in front of Mount Sinai. Now we're getting closer to the mountain. We'll look at some of the sites at the base of the mountain. Deuteronomy talks about a stream that came down from the mountain. And there is a dry stream bed that has pools of water still, not as much water as in the past, but you see pools of water with fig trees growing. You can see the stream actually widens out at the base, and it would flow into this, what we call a dry lake bed. It's just a depression at the base of Mount Sinai, and around this lake bed are these wells. They're 18-foot diameter wells. They found, I think, 7 or 8 so far. Now, this is what the locals will tell you, and people who deal with animals, that this is a corral site. The locals, remember, they were telling us how the animals were sacrificed at the end of this corral. And around this altar and corral site are these marble pillars And Ron in 1985 found one with a Hebrew inscription on it that mentions the mountain of God, Moses, and Solomon. And he hid it because he was afraid that the Saudis with him would destroy the evidence. So somewhere there is still this piece of marble with ancient Hebrew on it. Now about 6,500 feet up on the mountainside is this cave that's about 20 or 30 feet deep. And it's the only cave on the side of the mountain. And so we know from 1 Kings chapter 19 that Elijah fled to the cave on Mount Sinai. And here we're just looking out down to the little Bedouin village at the base. You can see we're flying from the cave. And this is kind of like a distinctive feature. If you find a tree growing between two boulders, you know you're at the right site. That's kind of how people locate it. Right above the cave is this huge boulder split in two with a tree in the middle. And then behind it is the mountain. So we're behind the cave. There's a nice plateau area. Now the Bible doesn't say Mount Sinai has a plateau, but it did say that the 70 elders went up on top of the mountain to eat with God. So this is a perfect spot to have a potluck with Jesus. Now from the plateau, we're going to ascend to the summit, which is about another 2,000 or 3,000 feet. Or, I'm sorry, 1,000 feet. It's a 7,500 foot mountain. So here we're at the highest summit of peak of Mount Sinai. And we're just getting a pan of the land of Midian during sunset. And so we have 2 more videos, and then we're finished. We'll take questions. This next one is what it was like for us to climb the mountain and get this footage. And so you're going to see a behind-the-scenes view of hiking up this mountain. We're supposed to be very quiet, and my photographer's down there banging on everything and making all sorts of noises. Well, we are making our way up the mountain. You can see behind me is this huge cliff. But we found a path around it, so we're hoping at the top there's not another cliff, but an easy drop down into the plateau. Straight down across that valley is the Golden Calf altar site. You can see it from here, and then it opens up to the big plain in front of the mountain. You see Adam down there taking photos.
Is that low? Good, or we can...
That's good. Oh yeah.
We can drop it lower.
So we're doing our first
I see where I'm at.
drone flight on top of the plateau area. That's good there. Go for it.
Alright, recording. Whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa.
What?
Okay, it's wind.
Oh, just start from there. Just keep going.
I lost
They can edit
control
that.
of it.
They can edit.
I
Keep
can't
going.
even record right now.
He lost control of the drone. He wasn't sure what was going on.
You're probably
It's super windy over there.
This is, oh wait, I do have control.
So we're scared we lost it.
The camera's not working with me.
That's fine. Just bring it closer to us. Okay, it's windy right there. Okay.
No,
there.
it's like I was getting some interference or something.
Okay.
That was
Just start
weird.
from there. You don't have to. We don't need super long shots.
1 second. That was strange. Recording?
Okay, I'm recording. Here we are at Mount Sinai. Doing some
You
drone
ready?
footage. Yep, ready. Yeah, just go straight up. Let's get a photo first from this location. Kind of up in the air, almost level with the mountaintop.
Still cutting off the peak.
Okay.
Almost there.
There's going to be a spike in audio coming up. You know, we have a thunderbolt we put in. Maybe it'll wake everybody up. But I'm going to turn the volume down. I don't know how high you have it. Yeah. You guys jumped. I did this at a TV studio, and everyone in the audience was like, just to kind of make you think what it was like when God gave the Ten Commandments, the thunder and lightning. Okay, we are on top of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. It's quite windy up there. Some people have asked me about the black rock on the mountain. So here we are actually getting some samples. Oh wait, it's Sabbath, I think, or Sunday. It's Sabbath. I'm sorry. I don't remember what it is, but I'm so tired. We're going to hammer this rock here and see what's inside. So, let's see about this part right here. You can see it's a little like dirt inside. That rock itself, I know. Basalt, anyways, I'm gonna get some samples here. Ow. It's kind of hard to do this one-handed. Let me try my right hand, it's easier. This rock is hard. You see the one that's cracked already. But where the cracks are, it's that light color. I want to get inside the rock. We need a thin section, so we're going to take some of these samples back and check them out. So on that trip, we ended up staying too late. Remember, we're at 7,500 feet. There's no tourists around. We're by ourselves up there. Two other guys on our team had already went down because they didn't want to climb down in the dark. And so this is sunset, and we have to go down a 7,500 mountain. There's no path. And so we ended up having, thankfully I had one headlamp and my iPhone light. And it took us from the top until we got back to the car. We left about 5:30, and we got to the truck at 10:30. So 5 hours to come down that mountain. This next video is a summary of everything. We made this after our second trip, so it doesn't have all the new drone footage. actually end on this. I promise. This is it.
And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long, and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me, and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's.
Well, that gives you a little taste of what it would have been like maybe when God gave the Ten Commandments. We have a group back east who they're really talented, and they're going to actually redo this whole video with special effects, and that will make it look like the mountain's on fire. That's like the Bible says. But that's just reading straight from the Bible. That was Exodus chapter 19 and 20. Anyways, we're going to end with questions, I guess. I don't know if there's any questions. If not, we can go home. This slide here summarizes all the evidence for this side of the mountain that the drone video showed, with the cave, the cow petroglyphs, the big plain in front of it, the graveyard, the stream that came down from the mountain. Question here, and we saw a couple over there.
Have they found the staff of Moses yet?
No, I've never heard if they have. I saw once a film on YouTube about it, like they were looking for it. But it was a documentary film. But I don't know why they would have saved it, but maybe they did. The Bible doesn't say anything about it, but besides Moses using the question right here.
Does it get there?
How hot? It depends on the time of year. So in the summer, if you're on the other side, the western side where the split rock is, it's really dry and hot. So summertime would be our summertime too. So like June, July, August, even into September, it can be really hot. So I'm not sure the Fahrenheit temperature. I would have to Google that. But on the eastern side, where they encamped on the plain, because it's a higher elevation, it's actually cooler there. But again, I don't know what the average temperature is. Now, right now, they're getting a lot of storms coming through there. So they do have, I think we mentioned that last night, flash floods and things. So in wintertime, it does get cold out in the desert. In the high desert, you have wind, and it can get, rain. So, yes.
What did you find studying the rocks taken out from the mount?
So on the rocks at the top. So the discussion is, first I'll mention the discussion, not the debate, but it's more of a discussion of, did God's presence change anything on the mountain when he was there? Exodus chapter 19 talks about this fire and the smoke going up to the very heavens. In Deuteronomy, if you look up the word fire, it's used over and over about God's presence and how the Israelites were scared, and this great fire that spoke out, the voice came out of this great fire. But also we know from the burning bush incident that the presence of God can look like a fire and not burn anything. The bush was not consumed. And so, but other times he did consume, the fire would consume people and the rocks. So that's the discussion. So what about the rocks on top of the mountain? The rocks are volcanic rock. So in time, I'm not saying God is a volcano, but before the Israelites were ever there in the past, when this area was probably right after the flood, when there was volcanic activity, it laid down volcanic rock. So the question then is, this black volcanic rock that's at the top, is there any evidence that the presence of God changed the outside of this rock? Is there any proof that his presence changed the rock? And we haven't finished our testing on that. We actually need to go back and get better samples according to the lab guy for him to test. He needs a sample that would show from the surface all the way through. We were getting all these little chunks, and he needed a bigger sample. It's just tough to bring down rock from a 75-foot mountain, 75-foot, 100 mountain. So, yeah, that's...
At that top, I don't know, it was just my impression that the black was like a straight line.
Yes, it is, yes.
And
It is.
then the rest of it is...
Below it is granite, and the top is black.
If it was a volcano, how in the world you have just a top black and the rest is...
Well, what the geologists will tell you, it's actually, they'll say, well, it's the roof pendant, or pendant top, I think is the name. Anyway, it's basically, they would say that it laid down like a lot, basalt is a type of volcanic rock that comes out of the ground. So it laid down this layer of rock, and then later on the granite pushed it up. So you had a layer, so you had that line, and then when the granite pushed up the rock, now you have the black rock on the top. Not that this was a volcano exploding on the top. They're just saying that it laid down this field of basalt and then pushed it up. There's a mountain in California near Needles, the border with Arizona, and I have photographs of it, and you'd think you're at this mountain because it looks very similar. There's a straight line of black and white. So I don't use that as evidence that this is Mount Sinai because there's a black top to the mountain. But what's interesting, because we believe it's Mount Sinai because of all the other evidence that we want to see, though, if there's any change in the black rock, because we know that God's presence was up there. So that would be interesting. Now, if we could prove that there's a change, like even like with a microscope showing that's like there's a layer of change that's not normally part of that type of rock, then that would be amazing. If it's not, then it's not. So that's why I'm not going to hype the black rock. I do have samples of it. I didn't bring any this time because I came from the East Coast, and most of my samples are in Sacramento. Was there a question over here or no? Okay, back. Yeah.
Are you leading back to the Middle East or to
Yes, to the Middle East, yes. Not just Saudi Arabia, but all over. Yeah. Any other questions? If not, it's 4 o'clock. Oh, you. It started off on my own. I own my own business. I'm a computer programmer. And so that's how it started. And then when the trips became more intense and we had to bring in equipment and photographers and videographers, then we have friends and family members and just random people who want to donate. So, any other questions? Okay, Pastor, I'm going to close with prayer.
Andrew, it's fascinating where the areas you've spent time on and are still continuing to explore. Do you believe that God left his footprints into the sand? For this time in history, I really believe it's coming. People will recognize, especially when the law is bundled with Sunday, the Ten Commandments are on the heart of people, hopefully.
What's really interesting is that this site, the Saudis are developing out into a type of Dubai where it's open, where Westerners can come in. So they're calling it NEOM, N-E-O-M. So if you go to neom.com, which is a Saudi government website, you can learn more about this region where they want to make a high-tech city or a bunch of cities and resorts on the coast of the Red Sea. So far, they don't show any development plans for Mount Sinai, so it could be an opportunity where, because they're opening it to Westerners to live there, where we could suggest to them to develop out this site or allow access for the tourists to come and see it, instead of right now where they kick you out and escort you out of their area if you get caught there. So that, and also this year they're opening up for tourist visas. So if you do want to go, instead of getting that complicated business visa that we had to do, later this year it's possible you can get a pretty cheap tourist visa. Now what we don't know is whether they'll let you go to this site or you have to go with an approved tour group with an approved government tour agency or not. So that is a big question. But definitely they are opening up tourism because they want to diversify from oil only.
All right. Any other questions? Have you been touched today? Have you been moved? I'd like to suggest something here. Can we take up an offering? Where's our offering buckets? We could find those. We could just pass an offering basket, and if you'd be willing to give a donation to help Andrew with his expenses, would you mind that?
Whatever people want to do.
All right. All right, I see Harold's going to get the offering bucket. Is anybody here that can play the piano just for a moment? See, the pianists are looking at each other.
Who's going to do it?
All right, you do it, I do it.